Dennis Gates has found his first recruit of the 2024 cycle, and I think he fits the Missouri program quite nicely. Plus, let's talk about the schedule for this upcoming season right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Thanks for making this show your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And some exciting news. Missouri has gotten a new basketball player, a new commit from the high school ranks. This one, Antonio Barrett, who is a really interesting prospect, in my opinion, who's listed as a 6'5" point guard out of Edmond, Oklahoma. As you might expect, the Sooners and the Cowboys were after this young man, but instead he has signed up to play with Dennis Gates and the Missouri Tigers. And I can really see why there's mutual interest on both sides there. I feel like he fits what Missouri and Gates and Charlton Young and the whole staff are trying to do here in Columbia. Again, listed at 6'5". He obviously has the preferred size and length that Gates has at basically every position. Now, Gates is not much for playing traditional back to the basket centers or anything like that. George Mikan ain't walking through that door. Neither is Arthur Johnson, probably, for a little more of a modern reference there. But the point is, he likes to have size and length at virtually every position. Defensively, he really values that a lot. You might remember Missouri playing Florida State, 2 or 3 years ago. And yeah, Leonard Hamilton and his squad they just seemed like they had arms everywhere on all the passing lanes, no shots at the rim or anywhere else for that matter when uncontested. So I think defensively, Antonio Barrett, once he gets some obvious reps under his belt, you don't expect freshmen to be stoppers by any means, but I just think he has the right kind of body that Dennis Gates is looking for. Now, offensively, I think he fits even better and more obviously, in fact. Now, despite the fact that it's 6'5", Barrett is not an explosive above the rim type of player. But to be fair, how many guys at the point guard position truly are? There are not a lot of Keon Doolings out there who are going to win you a dunk contest and actually legitimately play point guard. But what Barrett can do is obviously handle the ball. He's got some really advanced moves, stuff that you just didn't see high school players doing 10 or 15 years ago, Euro step type action, just good footwork and all that good stuff. But to me, maybe even more encouraging than all of it is I think Barrett, at least from what I could see in, his limited highlights that are on the internet, you don't want to take too much from just highlights, obviously. But one thing that I thought was extremely encouraging is that Barrett can play off of the ball too, it would seem to me, because there were several instances of him not only pulling up as the lead ball handler in a pick and roll, knocking down a shot or finishing at the rim, whatever it might be, but there were several times when Barrett was off the ball and knocking down catch and shoot three-pointers too. Again, really encouraging for any prospect, but especially in Dennis Gates' system where he's not afraid to play two point guards at the very least, maybe even three, primary quality ball handlers at the same time. If you include somebody like Isaiah Mosley in that equation last year, you'd often see Nick Honor out there with Sean East or Mosley or maybe even all three of those guys from time to time. So clearly Gates not afraid to play extra ball handlers, but again, at 6'5", it's going to be harder to pick on Barrett, at least in theory, when he gets his feet wet defensively. It's going to be harder to pick on him defensively at 6'5" when, again, Gates, Charlton Young, they like to switch a whole lot of stuff on defense. So what you don't want to do ideally is get, 5'8" guys guarding 6'8" guys. That's generally going to end poorly for the shorter man in that particular case. But again, I just think Antonio Barrett, also known as T.O., according to his friends, I suppose. But I think this is a great pickup for Missouri. And frankly, at this point, my limited knowledge and just whatever the limited information I have about Antonio Barrett at this point, while it's all encouraging, everything I've seen, what's really encouraging to me is that Dennis Gates likes him. Because at this point, I just trust Dennis Gates' judgment. Why shouldn't I? He brought in a bunch of, I don't want to say cast-offs, but guys that weren't exactly thought of as the greatest players in the history of college basketball, guys who were Horizon League players, a guy from Northern Iowa, that kind of stuff, brings them all in, and, well, you got 25 wins in one season. Imagine what Gates can do in year 2, year 3. You look at how Cleveland State went up under his time after that first season when he basically barely had time to put a roster together. Well, by year 2, they're already winning the league. I'm not saying Missouri's going to win the SEC this year, but I do think that this coming team's going to be quite a bit better than I think a lot of people are anticipating. And again, I'm just giving Dennis not only the benefit of the doubt this coming year, but also with this T.O. Barrett kid, Antonio Barrett, coming up, not this season, but the following. Hey, year 3 of Dennis should be a lot of fun, and hopefully Antonio Barrett will be a part of it. And speaking of this upcoming Missouri basketball season, well, the SEC schedule is now officially set for the Tigers, and the non-conference schedule is getting pretty close as well. So what do I think about this schedule? Hard, soft, something in the middle? Well, of course, I want to talk about all of that. But first, I want to tell you about FanDuel. And yes, it is that time of year. It's baseball season, folks. And you want to take your swing at FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets. That's win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run of the ball game, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And for you everydayers, well, as you know, I teased this already, but I really mean it this time. I want to talk about how I think NCAA football players should be very careful not to overplay their hand when it comes to this new video game. So let's talk about that coming up on the show. But first, we got to talk about the Missouri basketball schedule. The SEC schedule is set, and as usual, the Tigers are playing home and away series with Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and Arkansas. So no surprise there. But what I always look at is who are the other two teams that Missouri's going to play home and away games with. Well, this season, it's going to be Florida and South Carolina. Now, obviously, Florida, always a solid program. We kind of expect South Carolina to not be so good this year, I'm guessing. So really, this is about as fair of a schedule as could have been lined up for Missouri this year. Another thing I always look for, are the Tigers facing Kentucky at home? That's always a marquee matchup. But no, Tigers will be traveling to Kentucky and Alabama this year. Probably the most other noteworthy home game, Tennessee traveling, Rick Barnes, and of course the Vols coming to Columbia this year. But overall, the SEC schedule seems pretty fairly balanced. Not a lot of real hot takes either way. But I will say the non-conference schedule for the Tigers really starting to take shape here. I think you've got probably the biggest name opponents are probably set at this point. You may have seen that Missouri is going to travel to Pittsburgh this season to play the Pitt Panthers in the Steel City for the ACC SEC Challenge. Yes, the Big 12 SEC Challenge that ended up being pretty boring from a Missouri fan's perspective, let's be honest. Unfortunately, the Kim Anderson era didn't do us a whole lot of favors there. But a pretty interesting matchup. Tigers playing Pitt next season, a team certainly the Tigers can defeat, but a team that hasn't, ever since Jamie Dixon left, has never been quite the same, that program, let's be honest. So an interesting road trip for sure. Tigers also hosting Memphis this season, also set for a matchup. Hasn't been set just yet officially, but on the docket is Wichita State as well for a return matchup of Missouri's road victory last year. Also, of course, Tigers traveling to Allen Fieldhouse this year to take on Kansas. And as usual, the bragging rights game as well. So again, I did mention that Missouri's hosting Memphis, right? So again, just a bunch of pretty solid non-conference games. I'd say at least one or two more challenging, big-time sort of name programs that Missouri faced in the non-conference last season. So still a bunch of, I don't know, buy-win type games, if you will, to schedule for Missouri. Your Houston Baptists of the world, that type of thing. Lindenwood could be on the schedule again. I'm sure there'll be a few of those games, maybe just not as many as there were last season, where Missouri basically started with, 7 or 8 games against competition that if they would have lost to, it would have been a shock almost. But, certainly in retrospect, because Missouri was a 25-win caliber team last year. But obviously, Gates and company did know exactly what they were going to have in that team last year. So it's interesting to see that now the program has been a lot more established, certainly, and a higher quality, at least on paper, of guys that are being brought in this offseason in terms of transfers and high school recruits. Well, it makes sense that the schedule would look a little bit more challenging this season as well. And you know what? If you're an everyday listener of the program, I've given Dennis Gates a ton of credit for Kobe Brown's development, especially his shooting his senior season. I thought there's probably no way that happens if Konzo Martin is still the coach. No offense to Coach Martin. I just want to give Gates and his staff a ton of credit for what happened with Kobe this past season. I just don't think he's a first rounder if he's still under the Martin regime, or frankly, if he decided to transfer anywhere else. I'm not sure that it happens either. I think it's really unlikely, in fact. But I will say one thing I notice occasionally is people continue to conflate being a pro with being an NBA player. Well, here's the thing. Just to be clear, I always thought going into his senior season that Kobe Brown was a pro. I just thought he was probably going to play in Europe or perhaps, I don't know, Israel or something, as many former great Tiger players have. Lawrence Bowers, Ricky Paulding had a great career overseas. I just didn't think he was an NBA guy. And, I suppose Kobe Brown could go around and beat his chest and say that he proved me wrong, right? Or lots of other people who didn't think that Kobe Brown was a pro coming into this season. Well, my argument would be that it wasn't so much that Kobe Brown proved me wrong. He just got better. I mean, he was who he was as a three-point shooter before this season, which was a sub 30% shooter for each and every, I'm talking threes here, a sub 30% three-point shooter for his first 3 years, all 3 of them. So for him to suddenly shoot 45% or whatever it was, over 40%, I'm not going to call it an outlier because I think he's just that good of a shooter now. I think he is going to shoot a lot closer to that than the 28% or whatever he shot before. But again, I just think it's refreshing that Kobe didn't do what seemingly every athlete does these days. I'm talking about the absolute superstars of the NBA all seem to think that nobody believed in them growing up. And like, oh my God, one time they ranked me as the 8th best player in the country. Can you believe that? They had this guy or that guy was ahead of me. Oh my God, that type of deal. Listen, on one hand, I get it because it does take incredible motivation and just willpower to get yourself to the NBA. So whatever it takes, if you got to invent some narrative in your mind to get a chip on your shoulder, hey, good for you. I can't knock it really, but I just found Kobe's approach to this whole process to be a little bit more refreshing, a little bit more mature, honestly. And once he is 23, 24 or something like that, maybe that makes sense. A lot of these guys are 18, 19 years old who come into the league these days. But I think that's just the kind of guy that Kobe Brown is. He's not really worrying about the outside noise. He just focuses on what he can control, and I think that's what a lot of successful people do. So good for him. I did notice there was a coach on Twitter who posted something sort of similar. I apologize for not having this tweet in front of me. It just popped into my head, but basically this guy was saying all these guys who are getting Division II offers and acting like, oh, I'm going to show them in D1 that they slept on me or whatever. He's just saying, stop doing that. Stop acting disrespected, because frankly, it's narcissism a little bit. You know, guys are just trying to get the best players they can. They don't really care about you that much. There's one secret, but basically this coach was saying, stop acting like a D2 offer is disrespect and actually look at it as an opportunity that you should be grateful for. And yes, maybe you are overlooked. It's possible, or maybe more likely, you're just not as good as you think you are. If you're getting D2 offers, it's probably telling you that, well, that's the type of player that you are right now. Doesn't mean that that's the player that you're going to be tomorrow, because as Kobe Brown proved, you can always get better. And coming up, reportedly, the days of a transfer free-for-all, well, it may be getting reined in at least a little bit slightly by the NCAA. Is it too little too late? Well, I want to talk about that right after these quick words. By the way, you can now listen to Locked On Mizzou and any Locked On show on the Sirius XM app, and you can also listen to my absolutely wretched Kansas City Royals this afternoon on Sirius XM 177, or the slightly less horrendous St. Louis Cardinals this evening on Channel 89. Of course, you can check those out on the Sirius XM app as well. But you know what? Speaking of horrendous, some people really think that the current state of college sports is pretty horrendous. Just no loyalty to your institution whatsoever. And, well, it does seem like the NCAA finally, after basically putting their fingers, their hands over their eyes for the last few seasons, it seems like they're trying to do something to rein in the amount of transferring going on in all of the major sports these days. Well, specifically, this is the reading I'm getting from all of this. I'm not going to read you the entire article here. There's a lot happening, but basically the NCAA seems like it's going to be reining in second undergrad transfers. So essentially, if you're an undergrad, if you haven't received your degree yet, well, you're going to be a little bit more limited than you have been the past few seasons, although quite a bit freer, or more free to transfer, certainly, than guys were even 3-4 years ago. Think somebody like Drew Smith from Missouri, who transferred from Evansville, had to sit out an entire season. Well, more recently, it seems like guys who transfer once, even twice, they're just getting waivers. They're playing immediately, whether they have a degree or not. Think Xavier Pinson, who went from Missouri to LSU to New Mexico State. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think he's got a piece of paper in his hands just yet, or at least he didn't at the time he went from LSU to New Mexico State. So again, if you're a grad transfer, hey, you can basically do whatever you want. On the other hand, though, again, it seems like the NCAA is saying, hey, you get one freebie as a transfer, but again, unless there's some circumstances, say maybe a coach gets fired or something like that, they're just going to be a lot more strict, or at least so they say, when it comes to granting waivers for that type of thing. Again, a second undergrad transfer, seems like they're going to be getting a lot more strict on that than they have been the last couple years or so during the COVID era. So my opinion is, I guess that's okay. I'm actually more or less okay with that. At this point, though, I don't know if they're really going to be able to stick to their guns on that, because if at some point a bunch of prominent college players get together and decide that they don't like this, well, in this day and age, if you're not pro player, that doesn't go over very well, at least in terms of the popularity contest. Listen, anybody can stick to their guns and have whatever opinion you want, but when it comes to the old popularity contest, and God knows most people are really, really conscious of that, I just don't know that the NCAA is going to actually stand firm on this. I think a lot of this is too little too late. I think the cat is out of the bag, if you will, but you know what? I could be wrong. But hey, thanks for listening to me. As always, right or wrong, I'm here for you as much as I can. And it sounded like there's going to be a lot of breaking Missouri recruiting news on the football field coming soon. Maybe some basketball stuff too. Obviously, T.O. Barrett kicked off this period here, but it looks like the next couple weeks or so, going to be a lot of news in terms of football recruiting. So I'll have it all for you right here on Locked On Mizzou.